this video, I'm going to show you how to make a very simple hair fork using an impression from an impression die at Potter USA. So here I have already pressed my impression into the die and sawn it out. I used 16 gauge copper, so it's pretty solid. And here I have some heavy gauge copper wire. You can usually buy this by the foot at your local hardware store. And this looks like it's about 10 gauge. So it's going to be nice and strong and be able to, withstand being put in and out of hair all the time without losing its shape. And to determine how much I need, I'm just going to kind of eyeball things here. I think I want my hair fork to be about this long. So I'm going to eyeball that and then double the length, because I want my hair fork to have 2 tines. And then I will mark where I'm going to cut it with my saw. So I just have a little saw mark there, and then I'll cut it at that spot. And I'm just using my jeweler's saw to cut this. And then I'm going to file a slight taper to make the ends of this hair fork a little bit pointed. So I'm just going to rotate it on the bench pin using my file, and it keeps slipping. So remember, you can modify your bench pin. I'm just going to file a little groove in here to hold that wire so that it doesn't keep slipping around on the bench pin. And I don't want it to be super sharp, but I do want it to have a nice taper to it. Okay, and now I'm ready to flatten this out. And I'm just using a nylon mallet on the anvil and rotating the wire to straighten it out and make it nice and even for my next step, which will be bending it in half. It's easier to straighten it out when it's all one long piece. So I'm just gently tapping down the high spots, rotating the wire, making it nice and straight. And after it's straight, I can just bend it in half over the horn of the anvil or over a ring mandrel or something like that. So here I have it bent in half, and I'm just going to flatten this top curve so that I can solder it to my impression a little more easily. If it's round, it's fine, but this gives the solder a little more surface area to make that join a little stronger. And now I'm ready to solder the 2 pieces together. So I have my impression set up here on my solder block, and I have my fork element, and I'm just placing them so that they're, sitting and being held together with gravity. And I'm going to flux the area where they join, and just using a little bit of paste flux here. Someday I'll get a flux brush, but for now it's my tweezers. And remember, flux is your friend. It absorbs the oxides that come as you heat your metal. And solder likes clean metal. So the cleaner you can keep your metal when soldering, the better. And flux is what does that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and light my torch, heat this up to boil off some of the moisture. And you can see my little pile of solder pallions down there in the right-hand corner. So I'm just going to begin heating this piece. And probably the fork itself is going to require more heat than the impression because it's a much larger piece of metal. So while I'm heating everything, I am going to pay attention to making sure I heat the fork a little bit more because I do believe it's going to require a little bit more heat than that small piece of sheet metal that makes up the impression. And once my flux has settled down a little bit, I will just add my little solder pieces. And these are sheet solder, so they kind of slide under in between the wire and the impression really nicely. So I'm just kind of tucking them in and around that seam where the two pieces come together. So you can see I'm just kind of tucking them in and around there. Where the pieces connect and touch. I really want the solder to flow the length of this connection, the whole length. So that's why I'm placing them kind of evenly along that area. And I'm trying to avoid excess solder and having the solder flow out onto the top of the impression. So I'm just kind of paying attention to all these things. And once the solder is placed, you can just get a little more aggressive with your heat and heat the piece up until the solder flows, which my solder has flowed. I'm going to turn this around and make sure it flowed all the way through that seam. And it looks like I could use a little more solder. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more pieces on the front, or on the top, whatever you want to call that. And same thing, just kind of tucking them in and along that seam. And then I'll heat evenly again to flow that solder, and I should be good. So just heating until the solder flows. And now I can pickle and clean this and check out my seam. Okay, so I've pickled it and cleaned it, and it looks really good. I'm ready to just work harden these tines and shape it how I want it to be for the hair fork. So I'm just using a nylon mallet to hammer down these tines to work harden them because they're really soft from soldering. So I'm going to spend some time here on the anvil work hardening this metal without marring it. You could also use a metal hammer, but just know that it would stretch your metal and leave hammer marks. So just, pay attention to what's going to happen when you make those choices. And you might want hammer marks on your hair fork, and that would look beautiful. So, do what's best for you. And I want kind of like a little wiggle in my hair fork. I don't want it straight like this. So I'm going to just mark with a Sharpie kind of where I want some bends to be. And then I'm just going to really simply bend it just kind of with my fingers and give it sort of this wavy line. And I'm just doing it by hand, nothing fancy. You could do it over a mandrel if that works better for you. I would try to avoid using like pliers because they can leave tool marks, but do whatever works best for you. And I do have some little marks in my tines that I'm going to have to finish out, but I'll save that for last. So you can see I'm just kind of bending this and eyeballing it. I'm not being super particular. I just find that having it have some shape holds in the hair a little better than a straight fork. So that's kind of roughly what I'm going for. Just mess with it a little bit more, but it looks pretty good. And then I'll do my final finishing, sanding, polishing, that kind of thing. And then I'll put a patina on it and it will be finished. And this is the final hair fork with a patina and a polish. Simple, beautiful, and that's it.